Hi, Adam here from Ward Tone Records in Hampton, New Hampshire, and today I'm going to talk about why your local record store is probably offering you significantly below retail price for the records you bring in to sell to them or trade in for credit. This is a topic that's come up a couple of times recently because there was a couple of different people who came in who were not happy with the price that we offered them for their stack of used records that they were selling to the store. Now, the vast majority of people have been happy, and a few have been thrilled with the amount that we've offered them, which is great. But there's been a couple people lately who were not happy with that, and that's perfectly fine. But I want to explain a little bit to some of you who may have this question in your mind, because I know I had this question in my mind before I started running a store. When I was just a collector who would occasionally bring records or CDs into trade, I always thought, why aren't they offering me more? I can tell, they're charging a lot more for them here, so I'd like them to offer me more. So now that I'm on the other side of the counter, if you will, I have a lot more insight into that. So I would like to share that with you today. First of all, I strive to be very fair to anyone who comes in and wants to trade records to us or wants to sell them to us. Usually about half the people want credit and about half the people want cash, and all of that is great. And we've even had a substantial number of people come and just donate collections of records to us, which we're incredibly grateful for. And in fact, we had so many that we even had a day last week, a Saturday, where we just put about 500 free records out in front of the store and let everyone know and invited folks to have free records because we just had way too many, and there were some in genres or condition that really just wouldn't sell with the limited space we have. So that may be something we end up doing a couple times a year because we get these great collections in, and oftentimes some of the collection is sellable and some of it's not. So that's something to keep in mind. But digressing a little bit here, let me get back and say, we strive to be very fair, right? Ultimately, we want you coming back, and we want you telling your friends you had a great experience with us, and we want you to, maybe sell us more records someday. I'm still fairly new at this, and I've even lost money on a couple of deals trying to figure it all out. I think one thing that people don't understand when they see the prices in the bins and on the wall, and then they see what we're offering them, is the incredible amount of work and overhead that goes into and expense, right, that goes into getting these records retail ready and presenting them to you, aside from just the raw cost of the records. So once I get one of those collections in, which may be anywhere from a dozen to several hundred records thus far, it could be any amount really, I have to go through that and do a lot of work. And so what I do personally, and each store might have a slightly different process, but what I do personally is I go through the records, I clean them with the ultrasonic cleaner unless they're going into the really cheap bins, which are on the floor, $7 and less. Anything $8 and above, I clean it with the ultrasonic cleaner. I research the record if I'm not already familiar with it. I research the band, the specific LP, and then I grade the condition to help me price it. Then I spend some time pricing the record, sleeving it, stickering it, and entering it into our inventory database. All of those things, of course, take a bit of time, and that labor cost, adds up as you're doing this for, hundreds of records. We're approaching, over 100 a week, not counting those cheaper bins, not counting CDs or any of the other, ancillary products that we sell. So it's a lot of work. I'm up, most nights till about midnight, working on cleaning, grading, pricing records. And then on top of the labor expense, there's a lot of overhead that goes into running the store that people don't really think about. And one of those things is rent. The labor cost I already mentioned, but there's labor cost for processing those records, but also for running the register, right? If you're in a multi-vendor store, that usually comes in the form of a commission, which isn't a significant part of the price that we sell the record for. So rent, labor cost. There's also business insurance, which is in the United States an essential thing as well. and then there is marketing and other business expenses that people don't really think about. And then you also would want to be, particularly if you're not familiar with all of the records, which, rarely would I be familiar with every single record, right? But there is risk, right? When you really dig into that collection of 500 records and look at each one, you usually find that some are in terrible condition, even if the majority are really clean, or the ones you spot checked before you bought them are really clean. I also sometimes, it's rare that I get a collection, for example, of CDs in where I open up every single CD and the CD is there. Sometimes the LPs are missing, sometimes the CDs are missing. It's not possible to check 500 CDs before you buy a lot. You've got to make a decision, that doesn't take 5 hours, or even 2 or 3 hours usually to go through. So you have risk basically in two ways. One is when you really get into playtesting them, are they going to sound okay? And then also, are these going to sell, right? So I may start out an LP at $20 thinking this is an obscure LP, but it's a really cool LP. So I'm going to put this at $20. And then a couple months later, I'm, potentially could be marking it down to 10. A couple months after that, maybe marking it down to 5 or even $1, or potentially ending up giving it away, right? We very often run specials where we give a free record for, if you spend $50, you get a free record. That's a common one that we run. So, a lot of these records end up basically, going out to people where we're not making money off them directly, which is fine. So there's risk involved, right? Even if I think something's going to sell for 20, and certainly there's records, if I get a clean copy of Fleetwood Mac Rumors in, obviously that's going to sell, right? But other things which are a little bit more obscure, maybe they'll sell, maybe they won't, maybe they'll take a week, maybe they'll take 6 months. So that's risk that you kind of have to factor in when, pricing out these collections and offering for them. And the goal here, a lot of times with buying these collections, is as much as anything is to educate myself, because I see some cool, interesting records that I've never seen before, and I think, wow, this looks like a really interesting jazz record, or a really interesting 60s pop record, or I'm still trying to educate myself, and I probably will be for the rest of my life. So I buy them as much to educate myself as anything else, and also then I can share that with some of the folks that come in here and hey, have you heard this cool band? Check it out. Throw it on the turntable. Have a conversation, and maybe turn something on to something they otherwise would have never heard of. And that also ties in with preservation. There's a lot of great music out there that isn't necessarily on streaming, or if it is, it's buried and no one ever finds it, which are on some great LPs with beautiful artwork, and they really they kind of exemplify a certain vibe or a certain era or a certain feel, and they're not household names and they're not super well known. So one of my goals is to be a part of the preservation of that kind of music, and also just sharing the love of music with others, and particularly passing it down to a new generation of folks. We have a lot of older people who come in and sell us their lifetime collections. And I have 15, 20, 25-year-olds coming in and going through all this classic rock, classic soul, classic jazz, and they're really starting to learn about it, and they're excited about some of this classic stuff. So more than having it be a big money maker, it's really buying these collections. I'm interested in them because of education, of preservation, and sharing the love of music. There are other ways. If you don't want to trade into a record store, there are other ways that you can sell your records you never listened to, or your entire collection. There's 3 other ways. One that I can think of off the top of my head, that are major ways. One would be eBay. So, and the thing that I'll say before I jump into this is, if you want to, be getting more of the money, if you will, you also have to be doing more of the work. So on eBay, you have to take individual pictures of each record, and you have to upload them and make a description, and you have to give a 35%. I think it's 35%. I don't use eBay, but I've heard between all their different fees, 35% goes to eBay, and then you need to get a bunch of packing materials, and you need to go to the post office and deal with the customer service issues. So that is work, and that's how you would get a higher price. Another way is to go grab a table at a record show. You'll usually pay 50 or $100 for a table, and you'll sit there all day trying to sell your records. And it's a lot of fun to talk with people about records and, you know, sell someone some records that they're really going to love, at least for me. But not everyone has the time or the desire to do that. And, you know, you may not sell them all like you would at the shop. You know, I'm just going to take your whole pack. I'm not going to, or your whole stack of records. You know, I'm not going to cherry pick it. The folks there will be cherry picking maybe the most desirable ones out, and then you'll be left with a pile, you know, which is perhaps less desirable. And the third way is consignment. You know, I don't have the room to do consignment right now, but some shops will do consignment. They usually keep 50% though, and they're only interested in rare or higher value records for consignment. So, you know, you may only be able to sell you know, some of them on consignment, the really expensive ones, and it will take longer to get your money, and it's more of a process. The benefits of selling to a store like mine, you know, selling the entire stack, whether they're just extras you never listened to or your entire collection, are, you know, that the process is relatively seamless. Typically within, you know, a very short period of time of you bringing in the records, I'm able to look at them. And very often if I'm here, you know, right when you're here, we can look at them together. I can give you a quick quote. It's seamless, it's fast, you can get cash or Venmo very quickly, and you're supporting, you know, a new, in this case new, but in general, if you're selling to other stores, you're supporting a small business that is creating a space for the community to come and enjoy records, you know, without kind of a digital element. It's real, it's here, it's in the moment. And these records will be treated in almost every case, and certainly here, very, very well. You know, they'll be preserved and they'll circulate within your community. So those are some intangible benefits in addition to, you know, getting some money for your records as well. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. So feel free to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.